This video will show the country that is Cambodia today and also look at its past, both distant and recent. Cambodia is bordered by Thailand to the west, Laos to the north and Vietnam to the east. The area is also known as Indochina, a reference to the merging of the Indian and Chinese cultures in earlier times. To get to Cambodia, I first travelled to Bangkok and thence to Phnom Penh. Then to Siem Reap, the home of the historic Angkor temples and some very interesting history. The first part of this video will show the temples and culture from Cambodia's distant past. Secondly, we will see some of the recent past and then the present of this vibrant country. Cambodia is now recovering from years of war and disruption. But first, how do we get there? River travel is common in Cambodia because most of the roads have been wrecked. Air travel is now commonplace into and around Cambodia, especially between Bangkok, Phnom Penh and Siem Reap. With air travel being what it is, however, the attendant delays and waiting at the airports do tend to drag.
May I have your attention please change and final call for Japan Airlines flight RA402. Flight RA402 to Kathmandu.
This is Phnom Penh, the bustling traffic of rush hour on a Friday evening. To get to the temples of Siem Reap, an enjoyable way to see the country is to take a fast boat up the river. As you can see, the tourists prefer to sit on the roof of the boats, both to escape the heat of the cabin interior and to view the sights on the way. Tourism in Cambodia is now becoming well developed, with people from all over the world visiting what is, from the tourist point of view, an unspoiled and interesting country. This is one of the main thoroughfares of Siem Reap. As you can see, it is little more than a dirt road. There is very little good roading in Cambodia, but construction is going on all the time, with projects from the international community helping bring Cambodia back from the devastation of war. The local shops sell most things, including petrol from plastic soda bottles. On the way to the temples, there is rebuilding to be seen. This was a torture centre for Pol Pot, now it's a monument of masons. All along the 7-kilometre journey to the temples there are stalls and homes in the countryside. Siem Reap province covers some 10,000 square kilometres, most of it jungle and rice paddies. Many of the temples are covered in the jungle. Angkor Wat is the largest and most famous of the numerous temples in the Siem Reap area. This view is from the nearby Phnom Bac Heng temple. To get to the Phnom Bac Heng temple, you must first climb this. Even at dusk, this is 35 degrees Celsius. The temple is built on a natural stone mountain and this hill is very steep. Once you are up, there are some very steep steps up the temple itself. I nearly had a heart attack getting to the top. Phnom Bac Heng was built in the 10th century by Suryavarman I. There are 12 religious sanctuaries on each of the levels of the complex. The kingdom of Cambodia really got going in the 7th century, each successive king building one or more temples in his lifetime. Bayon Temple was built in the 12th century by Suryavarman VII. One of the more recent temples, it is located in what was the middle of a very large city, now gone as the wooden buildings did not survive the passage of time. There are many representations of the four faces of King Suryavarman VII, looking over and protecting the people and facing towards the four cardinal points. These four-faced statues are common throughout the Khmer culture. Griffin and snake motifs are commonplace, though a lot of the statuary has been looted over the years. Bayon Temple is very large and has its own team of security guards. There is a lot of reconstruction underway here, and this is also a very popular temple with the tourists. The detail of this stone balustrade portrays the body of a snake, most of which is now gone. Now suffering from subsidence, this paved area was once flat and level. At various places throughout the ruins you can see small shrines to Buddha that can date back some thousands of years. A couple of temple guards protecting a wall. Pillars and columns are very prevalent in this complex, and they are often decorated with bas-relief. Royalty and high priests used to frequent the upper levels of these temples. Now they are a resting place for the ubiquitous backpacker. This is a gallery on the eastern side of Bayon Temple. And this is another representation of Suryavarman II looking over his people. The majority of the large statues are made up of individual carved blocks forming the whole. Also constructed in the 12th century by Suryavarman VII, the Elephant Terrace is a long depiction of elephants in various scenes of battle, parts of which are undergoing reconstruction. The quincunx is a celestial temple and was once cloaked entirely in gold. Legend has it that the king slept at the top of the temple and that a snake princess would join him every night. If the king missed one evening, the entire kingdom would suffer a terrible famine, and if the snake princess did not appear, the king would surely die. Preah Pisnulok is another by Suryavarman VII, built on the battlefield where he was victorious against the Shams. Surrounded by a moat, this was another city of some size and included a traveller's rest and a hospital. It was overgrown until recently, when rebuilding began. Trees often take over the temple ruins, intertwining their roots with the stone blocks. There is a lot to this temple, and looking through the doorways, there is a lot more to see. Often there are, in the midst of overgrown temple ruins, other buildings, which, though smaller, are just as ornate. Rajendravarman II built East Mabon in 952 as a sanctuary for his ancestors. It was once in the middle of a large baray or lake and was only accessible by boat. The Rolos group of temples date from the 9th century and are some of the oldest surviving examples of Khmer art. There are Brahmin cattle depicted here, indicating the earlier Indian influences on the Khmer culture. It is easy to see here the detail and artistry that the Khmers decorated the temples with. some of which is in very good condition even after more than 1,000 years. Many of the rollers temples venerate Hindu gods and are in close proximity to modern-day villages. The construction of the rollers group is also an early example of using both pink sandstone and the darker granite, which became more prominent in later temple complexes. This is sandstone. Ta Prohm is a fascinating temple, also known as the Jungle Temple. It has been left in the state that it was when it was rediscovered, with the jungle encroaching at every corner. It is easy to see how that despite the ornateness of the architecture, the simple block-on-block building methods have resulted in collapse over time. There are trees here that are supposedly some 300 years old. Given that the temple itself is over 900 years old, that makes the trees relatively recent arrivals. It is difficult to see whether the stones are supporting the tree or whether the tree is supporting the stones. This is called the crocodile tree, though now it's covered in graffiti. These delicate bas-reliefs are of Apsara, the famous Angkor dancing girls. And this is called the snake tree, so named for its intertwining roots. Ta Prohm was once home to over 72,000 people, and this is the monkey tree. Amongst those 72,000 people were 2,500 monks and 650 dancers in the court. And this tree is called the river tree. All of the trees with these amazing roots are banyan trees. Even though the sites have been open to tourists with most areas accessible, there are areas where it is too dangerous to go due to falling masonry. There are numerous examples of ornately wrought bas-reliefs, sometimes depicting daily life, sometimes myths and legends, and sometimes of an instructional nature. It is unfortunate that most temples, including Ta Prohm, have been heavily looted, with the spoils ending up in so-called art collectors' collections. When you see what little is left in the temples, you realise there has been extensive pillage in the name of art. This is really an example of a tree holding it all together. Tomanon was built in the 11th century by Uda Yadit Yarvarman and is dedicated to the Indian god Vishnu. Again, heavily looted with only a few bas-reliefs remaining. Pule was built in 893 by King Suryavarman I and was another temple located in the middle of a lake which has since disappeared. The bas-reliefs here are quite detailed and show warriors as well as dancers. This is a very happy Apsara. This is the first script I've come across, and perhaps it's all the Khmer Rouge left when they started again at year 0. All these gentlemen are hanging on to a large 7-headed snake at one of the gates that are the entrance to Angkor Thom. Angkor Thom was a large city and the gates are guarded by giants' heads. Each of the gates has 4 heads, again facing the 4 cardinal points. Each terrace or layer of the temple is a step closer to nirvana, and by worshipping the appropriate deities, one progresses to the hereafter. Here you can see a succession of shrines ascending to heaven, or nirvana. It is quite common to see various pieces of decoration reassembled on the ground, waiting to be recited. The 7-headed snake commonly protects the entrances to most temples. I am reliably informed that this is a crematorium placed at the base of the temple so the departed could begin the journey upward. And with the temperature in the late 30s, you can imagine that this is a very hot place. This is Baksay Shan Krong, a small Hindu temple built in 921 by King Suryavarman I. There used to be a golden image of Shiva inside. It's gone now. Angkor Wat is undoubtedly the biggest and most famous of the temple complexes in Cambodia. This is the west gate and the causeway that crosses the huge moat, and as you can see there are plenty of tourists. If you look into the distance you will see the distant spires of Angkor Wat itself. Built in the beginning of the 12th century by Suryavarman II, Angkor Wat is styled as a funeral pyre dedicated to Vishnu. This is the main entrance through the west gate. Once inside the complex proper, there is a walk of about a kilometre to the temple itself. Angkor Wat is almost overrun by tourists and is undergoing reconstruction. It is interesting that Pol Pot didn't demolish this temple. These galleries enclose swimming pools in the outer areas of the temple buildings. There are larger, steep flights of stairs leading to the top levels, and some of the intricate representations of Buddha are remarkably well preserved. One can't help wondering what the monk here makes of all the tourists in this sacred place. There are many areas of the temples that have not been too devastated, and the galleries of Angkor Wat are a good place to start when seeking out the more intricate carvings and bas-reliefs. These are Aspara. Park Buddhas, still sacred after all these years. Many of the walls, pillars and roofs bear intricate decoration. Here are depictions of various dancing poses. And here a depiction, or what's left of it, of court life. Back at the Bayon Temple, Though covered in lichen, the quality of stonework is obvious to the eye. It is a very detailed work, and even the feet are pointed sideways to prevent the giving of offence. This reminds me of the description of an early Chinese scholar describing the king of Angkor when coming out of the temple. All the soldiers and elephants came first, with column upon column extending out of the temple in great number. The royals would be perched high on the backs of the elephants. Following these there would be courtiers and the dancers too numerous to count, and then finally the king himself, resplendent in gold and finery. And on the other side of this entrance we see a repetition with many of the same figures and processions. One of the great problems in the temples is the erosion caused by water, seen as dark patches here on the bas-relief. The proliferation of representations of the people and their day-to-day lives was said to bolster the reigning monarch's position as God-King. All the carving, and we must remember that more often than not the carvings were decorated or covered with gold, was a direct display of the monarch's wealth and power, much as it is today. There is a legend that is based in fact that deals with the rise of the god kings as rulers of Cambodia. In the 8th century, the then very young king of Cambodia demanded the head of the king of Java, a much more powerful gentleman by the name of Zagab. As it happened, when Zagab heard of this, he invaded Cambodia and decapitated the young king instead. But being wise, Zagab returned to Java with another young man from Cambodia, who he trained in the arts of kingship. This young man was Suryavarman II, one of the first Khmer god kings. These are aspara from the 8th century. The term aspara refers to the dancing girls that were part of the court life in ancient temples and palaces. In those days, a king's wealth was measured not only in gold and jewels, but by the amount of warriors, dancers, courtiers, elephants and buffalo and so forth he could keep and provide for. Throughout the centuries, the Khmers were active invaders and recipients of invasion to and from surrounding kingdoms and countries. When the Thais finally, after several successes and failures over the centuries, invaded and brought an end to the Khmer dynasties in 1594, they captured the entire corps de ballet, some 1,500 aspara, much like these shown here, and took them all back to Thailand. The dances as performed by the Khmer aspara then became what is now known as traditional Thai dance, only now in the 20th and the 21st centuries is the traditional Khmer dance enjoying a resurgence. Almost everywhere in the temple complexes are works of reconstruction or piles of rock awaiting reconstruction. At one temple, when the restorers began to rebuild, they painstakingly disassembled the whole structure, carefully numbering each block and recording the position on paper. Unfortunately, Pol Pot and company destroyed pretty much all the paper in Cambodia, so now the blocks are a giant big jigsaw puzzle. Yet more interesting is that with the aid of computers they have completed the puzzle and now ready to rebuild. There are numerous water reservoirs, lakes, ponds and moats in the Siem Reap province. The main reason that Angkor Wat could maintain a population of more than 1 million people at a time when London, England was approximately 1/10 of the size was that the entire region was crisscrossed with canals and irrigation schemes. Modern satellite imagery clearly shows the extent of these systems, the majority of which have disappeared into the jungle and become overgrown. Because of the extensive water supply, topped up each monsoon, they were able to get 3, 4 and sometimes more crops of rice a year compared to the lucky 1 or 2 of their neighbours. Even today, the freshwater fishing industry in Cambodia is a significant resource. These appear to be the municipal baths. Today there are fish and lotus farmed in the ponds and moats surrounding the temples. Moats and reservoirs also contribute to the not inconsiderable humidity at Siem Reap. Tourism is becoming a significant influence in Cambodia. It is expected that 1 million tourists will visit the Angkor complex in the 2003 year. Elephants that used to work in the jungle and move logs before the advent of machinery are now pressed into service to become part of the tourist experience at the temple complexes. snakes are common, and these monkeys have adapted to tourist life. They are playing with a dog, or at least the dog is playing with the monkeys. I'm not sure if the monkeys are enjoying themselves or are having to protect themselves. Probably the latter. This is a small snake I found, probably a baby python. Butterflies and dragonflies are numerous in Siem Reap, adding to the colour of the jungle. There are also many exotic flowers to be seen. In many out-of-the-way corners you can find monasteries tucked away in idyllic settings. But this fishing village is an entire community living in and around boats. Most of the houses are floating constructions, and I suppose this helps in the floods. This is a general store and other shops. Everyone gets around in much smaller boats, and even the young children are quite at home on the water. Quite a few mobile shops ply their trade in the village. And people often live in the smaller boats. This young girl is an expert boatman, completely at home, in boats and on the water. House moving, and this is how it's done. Dad's in the motorboat, towing the house through the weeds. Mum and Sis clear the way and the house slowly moves through the water. Auntie, however, is busy with the washing, despite the house move. And of course, if you've got a half-finished house as well, you take that with you. Then there's the collision. It must be confusing, moving the houses around all the time, especially when you left your house in one place and you come back and find it somewhere else. Grandma just wants to know what's going on. Eventually they sort it out and the house moves on by. On the few bits of dry land you can find some delicious food. There are also fresh fish and fishwives, sorting and grading the fish in preparation for sending it off to the markets in the cities, where it ends up on kitchen and restaurant tables. I think these are called snake heads. Ice is imported in blocks from Phnom Penh and stored in sawdust to slow the melting process. Pigs live in close quarters and just about everywhere. And this is, for the lack of a better name, the local tailor platform. Clothes mended and altered to order. Everywhere you go, there are kids, always happy, poor as church mice, but healthy and lively. This is water snail preparation, delicious when cooked over coals, very nice. They cut off the end of the shell and remove the operculum to get the meat out. Small motorbikes often tow large trailers. And this is a TV shop. They might be poor, but they still have TV. Still moving house. They must be stuck on something. Leaving in the rain, there are fish pens and fish traps in the deeper water. There are some permanent houses on the riverbank, quite some distance from the fishing village. All the houses seen here are built on stilts. Flooding being common, this is probably a wise precaution. And here is a more modern temple. Another way to get from Siem Reap to Phnom Penh is by hydrofoil on the Tonle Sap lake and river. Apparently there is a myth about an island rising in the Tonle Sap river when disaster strikes. When Pol Pot came to power, an island appeared in the river, and the river flowed backwards.
You want that cold drink?
Nothing.
Water, have my super water.
Plenty water?
Yeah. Buy my postcard.
No, I'm not buying your postcard.
Why?
Because I don't need a postcard.
Why you don't need?
No, I've got a picture here.
I have as well. You see your picture postcard. $4
No, thank you.
Buy this one at Angkor Wat.
No.
To buy it. Okay, $3.
Street sellers are everywhere, in the temples and anywhere there are tourists. And though they appear to swarm over the tourists, they are, by and large, nice and polite. And when you've had a hard day street selling, what better to do than to play with your friends? Kids are kids everywhere, it would seem. Often at the various tourist attractions, there are groups of disabled musicians. Many are limbless from the landmines, and there are also many who are blind from all the Agent Orange that America dropped on them during the Troubles. They eke out an existence from donations given to them by the tourists. This is what passes for an amusement park in Phnom Penh. Kids riding the escalator up and down. It's free and it's all they've got. Traffic in Phnom Penh, as in most of Asia, is horrendous. Watch this next bit, it makes turmoil look ordered. You can get anything on a bike, a big sack, a trailer of wood, 3 people, 4 people. Elephants are good luck. This girl was excited to touch an elephant. Elephants often ply the main streets. When I shot this footage, afterwards, several people applauded. Apparently, you shouldn't stand in front of an elephant. Seemed a happy enough elephant though. Too many people on a Toyota. There are a few large malls in Phnom Penh. They sell just about everything. Foreign goods are hard to find and expensive. Vegetable markets, indeed all the food markets, are held on the ground in the streets. You can get an amazing variety of food here. All of it fresh and hauled into the markets today. All kinds of fish, catfish, dace, snake eels, you name it, from the lakes and the rivers. And shellfish from the Mekong Delta and the sea. Slabs of meat from the butcher girls. And poultry prepared this morning. Giant blue claw prawns and more vegetables. And a happy butcher girl. Fresh live fish. And fish being prepared on none too hygienic cutting boards. There's some chickens waiting chop. And ducklings for pets. Roast suckling pets. Beautiful flavour. About $1 US a kilo. Magnificent. Wild comb honey. So fresh the bees are still on it. These are headed and skinned frogs, quite a delicacy. Live eels. Fresh catfish. Dried fish, each species prepared quite differently. Pigs' innards. Prawns, about 20 varieties. That's my pen next to those big ones. 100-year-old eggs wrapped in manure. Here's a bucket of real fresh fish. And they're being cleaned for the markets. These are barbecued birds, sparrows and doves in batter, all kinds. They're great with lime, salt and pepper. Deep fried, great big spiders. This is one of Cambodia's legacies, the Landmine Museum. These are typical landmines, deactivated hopefully. The paraphernalia on the walls that you can see here caused many amputees. This museum was closed down by the local police commander because he'd opened one in opposition. Corruption. Large amounts of anti-personnel mines. Mortar shells. The fields are still dangerous around here. These are man traps. This is Tuol's Sling, now a torture museum. It was a secondary school before Pol Pot used it as a torture centre. Apart from the photos on the walls, the steel beds and the manacles have been left much as they were at the time. It's a very sombre place. Many people died horrible deaths here. They used to hang people upside down with their heads in that water pot. Photos on the wall of the victims. Any educated people were killed, mostly by soldiers who were only 12 or 13. All that remains of year zero. There's a new age now. The monks and today's people are happy to be alive and looking forward to a future and prosperity. This is Mr. Elephant. His brother had his head smashed open on a tree at age 12 by Pol Pot's people. Young people using an old wooden ferry. These ferries cross the Tony Sap every 5 minutes or so. There is still a lot of old culture in Cambodia, and these are some of the oldest folk I saw. There are not many people over 40 because of the killing fields. Most of the aged population was killed, many millions. These women take obvious delight in the new generation. The government is striving to bring Cambodia back to the modern world, but corruption is rife and murder is common in politics. The Prime Minister, Hun Sen's wife, purportedly had a local beauty killed in the markets because the beauty was having an affair with her husband. And these are people fishing in the middle of town. I was shooting this from the second floor of the Foreign Correspondence Club. The riverfront in Phnom Penh is the place to promenade and the social hub of the city. People come from far and wide, and sometimes they come in their dwellings. A lot is being done to preserve the past in modern museums. And this is Hotel California. All kinds of coffins. Cambodia will rise from the corrupt third world mire it finds itself in. The Cambodians are a charming people in a lovely land with a hopeful future.